Across the United States, a massive winter storm turned daily life upside down. Winter Storm Fern spread ice, snow, and dangerous cold across much of the country, killing dozens of people and leaving hundreds of thousands without power. Highways became sheets of ice, airports shut down, schools closed, and just as the snow began to settle, forecasters warned that another powerful storm was already forming offshore. Meteorologists now describe Winter Storm Fern as the defining winter storm of January 2026. It began forming over North America around January 22 and quickly grew into a powerful system. Winds reached nearly 70 miles per hour, and the storm's central pressure dropped to around 962 hectopascals, a sign of extreme strength. Instead of striking one region, Fern spread across an enormous area, impacting nearly the entire continental United States. The storm's reach stretched from the deserts of New Mexico and West Texas, across the Great Plains, through the Ohio Valley and the Deep South, and all the way to the major cities of the East Coast and New England. Few winter storms in recent history have covered such a wide area with such intensity. Fern brought a dangerous mix of weather. In some places, heavy snow piled up quickly. In others, sleet and freezing rain coated roads, trees, and power lines in thick ice. Satellite images taken by NASA on January 26 showed a massive white band of snow stretching from the southwestern United States to the far northeastern corner of the country. It was a clear visual reminder of just how large and powerful this storm had become. In the mountains near Bonito Lake in New Mexico, snowfall totals reached around 31 inches. Roads disappeared under deep snow and plows struggled to keep up. Farther south, where communities were less prepared for winter weather, ice became the biggest threat. In parts of the southern United States, ice built up nearly 1 inch thick on trees and power lines, heavy enough to snap poles and pull wires to the ground. Arkansas saw particularly extreme conditions. In Little Rock, more than 6 inches of sleet fell in a single day, breaking a snowfall record that had stood since the late 1800s. Streets became nearly impassable, and emergency services struggled to respond as vehicles slid off roads and bridges. Meanwhile, far to the north in Minnesota, temperatures dropped to around minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit. In conditions like that, even short power outages become life-threatening. Without heat, homes quickly turned dangerously cold and exposure became a serious risk. By the time the core of Winter Storm Fern began to weaken around January 27, the storm had already disrupted the lives of tens of millions of people. Power outages spread across multiple states. Transportation networks collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. And for many families, the storm was far from over. What made Fern especially dangerous was not just its strength, but its timing and movement. Days before the first snow fell, meteorologists were already tracking the system. The National Weather Service issued winter storm watches and warnings along a long corridor stretching from the southwest to the east coast. Governors declared states of emergency. Road crews treated highways. Grocery store shelves emptied as families rushed to buy food, water, and fuel. Still, the storm exceeded expectations in many areas. Snow arrived earlier, ice lasted longer, and cold temperatures remained locked in place. As Fern moved eastward, its impact continued to grow. What began as a weather system on a map became a national emergency affecting nearly every aspect of daily life. And just as the country began digging out, forecasters delivered troubling news. A new nor'easter was developing off the east coast with the potential to intensify rapidly. For communities already buried in snow and struggling with outages, the warning raised fears that the worst might not yet be over. Winter Storm Fern was no ordinary storm. It was a reminder of how quickly conditions can change, how vulnerable infrastructure can be, and how a single weather system can bring an entire nation to a standstill. As Winter Storm Fern moved from west to east, the true scale of destruction became clear hour by hour. Roads turned into frozen traps. Vehicles lost control without warning. Emergency crews were overwhelmed as calls for help poured in from cities, suburbs, and rural towns alike. In New Mexico and West Texas, Fern first arrived as heavy snow. Mountain communities were buried and visibility dropped to near zero in some areas. As the storm pushed east into Texas and Oklahoma, snow mixed with freezing rain. Interstates became slick and dangerous, and bridges turned into sheets of ice. Authorities reported multiple crashes, including chain reactions involving dozens of vehicles. Some of the most severe impacts were felt in regions unaccustomed to prolonged winter storms. In the southern states, ice weighed down trees and power lines, causing widespread outages. Wooden utility poles snapped. Transformers exploded. Entire neighborhoods went dark, sometimes for days. By January 24 and 25, the heart of the storm was hammering the Mid-South and Ohio Valley. In Arkansas, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio, snow and sleet accumulated rapidly. In parts of Kentucky, ice reached nearly 1 inch thick. Trees broke apart under the weight. Power lines fell across roads and homes. Nationwide power outages surged past 1 million customers at the peak of the storm. As Fern curved toward the east coast, major cities came into focus. Washington, D.C. received nearly 7 inches of snow. Philadelphia saw more than 9 inches in a single day, its heaviest snowfall since the historic blizzard of 2016. Boston and parts of New England recorded totals exceeding 20 inches. Schools closed, trains slowed or stopped, and thousands of flights were canceled. Snowfall totals alone do not tell the full story. The human cost of Winter Storm Fern was severe and unevenly distributed. Different agencies reported different numbers, but compiled reports suggest that around 106 people lost their lives in connection with the storm and the extreme cold that followed. Other estimates range from dozens to more than 60 confirmed deaths, with warnings that the number could rise as delayed reports came in. Behind each statistic was a personal tragedy. In Tennessee, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Mississippi, officials reported deaths from hypothermia. Some people were trapped in unheated homes during long power outages. Others became stranded outdoors after vehicles slid off icy roads. Medical examiners also reported cases of carbon monoxide poisoning. In desperation, families ran generators, grills, or propane heaters indoors to stay warm. These decisions, made under stress and fear, proved deadly. In Texas, Arkansas, and other southern states, drivers were killed in crashes on frozen interstates and rural bridges. Many of these areas lacked the equipment and experience needed to manage severe ice storms, leaving roads untreated and dangerous. In the Northeast, deaths were linked to heavy snow removal. Some people collapsed while shoveling dense, wet snow. Others were involved in multi-vehicle pileups during whiteout conditions. In some cases, residents could not reach medical care in time because side streets remained blocked for days. Journalists tracking the storm warned that official death counts often lagged behind reality, especially in rural communities. Late reports from small towns and counties were expected to push totals higher. What made Winter Storm Fern especially deadly was that it was not a storm people could simply wait out. It reached into homes, cars, workplaces, and hospitals. Power outages turned cold weather into a life-threatening situation. Transportation failures delayed emergency responses. And in many cases, people were forced to make dangerous choices just to survive. As the skis cleared in some regions, the danger did not disappear. Hundreds of thousands of customers remained without electricity, particularly across Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, Louisiana, and parts of the Northeast. Nighttime temperatures continued to fall well below freezing. For elderly residents, young children, and those with chronic illnesses, each hour without heat increased the risk of serious injury or death. Downed trees and damaged infrastructure slowed repair efforts. Utility crews worked around the clock, but warned that full restoration could take days in the hardest-hit areas. For many families, the storm was not a single event, but a prolonged crisis with no clear end in sight. Winter Storm Fern left scars that went far beyond snow-covered streets. It exposed how quickly modern systems can fail, and how fragile daily life becomes when power, heat, and mobility disappear at the same time. Even as communities struggled to recover from Winter Storm Fern, forecasters delivered another warning. A new winter system was forming just off the east coast. This developing nor'easter had the potential to rapidly intensify into what meteorologists call a bomb cyclone, threatening fresh snow, strong winds, and coastal flooding. Early forecasts suggested that parts of the Carolinas, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, and New England could receive up to 12 inches of new snow. Wind gusts were expected to reach 60 miles per hour in some areas, creating blizzard-like conditions. Along the coastline, the combination of low pressure and strong winds raised concerns about storm surge and coastal flooding, especially during high tide. The timing could not have been worse. Roofs were already carrying the weight of heavy snow from Fern. Trees and branches were weakened or partially broken. Power lines were exposed and vulnerable. A second round of snow and wind threatened to undo recovery efforts and plunge more communities back into darkness. Across the hardest-hit regions, recovery from Fern entered a slow and exhausting phase. Utility companies managed to reduce nationwide outages from more than 1 million customers to around 400,000, but progress was uneven. In Tennessee alone, nearly 99,000 customers remained without power, according to local reports. Some utilities described the storm as their worst ice event in decades. In Mississippi, tens of thousands of customers were still without electricity even after crews restored power to more than 120,000 accounts. Rural areas faced the longest delays, with some residents warned to prepare for several more days without service. Transportation systems also struggled to recover. Analysts estimated that around 20,000 flights were canceled during the peak of the storm. American Airlines accounted for roughly half of those cancellations. On January 28 alone, the airline canceled more than 400 flights as it tried to rebuild operations at major hubs like Dallas-Fort Worth, Charlotte, and Philadelphia. Financial losses were estimated between $150 and $200 million. On the ground, snowplows and salt trucks continued clearing secondary roads and residential streets from the Mid-South to New England. Some school districts extended remote learning because buses could not safely reach neighborhoods. Federal offices and local governments operated on limited schedules with reduced staffing. Emergency managers warned that the coming days were critical. Power needed to be restored, roads had to be cleared, schools and public buildings required safety inspection. All of this had to happen before the next coastal storm arrived. In the longer view, Winter Storm Fern is likely to be remembered as more than just another winter weather event. Forecasters and emergency managers have already labeled it historic because of its scale, its combination of snow, ice, and cold, and the long-lasting damage it caused across such a wide area. The storm exposed weaknesses that officials have warned about for years. Power grids struggled under the weight of ice and wind. Transportation networks failed when key hubs shut down. Communities in both the South and the North proved unprepared for extended power outages during extreme cold. Scientists are careful in how they describe these events. No single storm can be blamed entirely on climate change, but Fern fits into a growing pattern that experts say is becoming more common. Stronger contrasts between warm and cold air, heavier bursts of precipitation, and more frequent extreme weather events. For cities from Dallas to New York, this means planning can no longer rely only on historical averages. Infrastructure must be designed for rare but severe events that push systems to their limit. Questions about investment are now front and center. Should power lines be buried? Should grids be hardened against ice and wind? How can public warning systems better communicate what long outages actually mean for families? Winter Storm Fern also raised urgent questions about protecting vulnerable populations. Elderly residents, low-income families, and people with medical needs face the greatest risks. How communities choose to address those gaps will shape how well they respond to future disasters. In the end, the story of Winter Storm Fern is not just about snowfall totals or canceled flights. It is about how quickly normal life can unravel when weather, infrastructure, and preparation collide. For millions of people, Fern will be remembered as the week the lights went out and the cold moved in. And as the next storm forms on the horizon, the lesson is clear. Preparation, communication, and resilience are no longer optional. They are essential for surviving the winters ahead.